baboon. Him and his dancers, yelling have no regrets. I do it for the love, the rush, the buzz, the hush. Whatever turns my knees so much to hit the lift. Even if you gotta sift through the shit to get to the twist. The smile high like it's your last line, but you never get another try. Do it right, do it for the ride, for the heat.
Daniel Falconer is a designer at WETA Workshop for more than 20 years. A senior designer at WETA Workshop responsible for weapon, armor, and creature design for Peter Jackson's The Lord of the Rings films and The Hobbit films. He worked with Jackson also on King Kong, 2005, and with WETA on the Chronicles of Narnia films, 2005 to 2010. Other films include King Kong Skull Island, District 9, Elysium, and Avatar. Daniel is also a Bigfoot researcher. His most recent trips to the States involve treks into Area X. Before that, he spent time in the Kiamichi Mountains of Oklahoma with Randy Harrington, and also down in East Texas at a research site with Randy. In this upcoming interview, Randy interviews Daniel about details of what he has witnessed and been a part of at Area X.
Hey there.
How are you, buddy?
I'm very well, thanks, man. It's really lovely to see you and hear your voice after all this time.
Thank you so much for squeezing us into your schedule, which is pretty busy. I've been getting online and looking at a lot of your work because I wanted to make sure that I wanted to do justice to all of the things all the projects that you've been a part of. I'm a little bit blown away with just the depth of everything that you've been involved with. I mean, all the books that you've authored and just man. But I do have a question for you.
Yeah.
When it comes to the orcs, I'm going to pull up some pictures and I'm going to say, man, are you telling me? Here we go. Are you telling me that these things right here were not influenced by Bigfoot?
I can see it. Yeah, crazy, huh?
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, anyways,
man, it's lovely to get to talk to you again. It's been a very, very long time. I know we've exchanged the odd email every now and again, but other than that, we haven't talked to each other, as you say, properly like this, and I think probably 15 years. But can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you good.
Okay.
So in 2010 was certainly the first time that I met you. We were at a conference called the Boggy Depot conference, and it was really just an open air venue. Weather was really bad. It was rainy. We put plastic tarps up around a pavilion to try to keep out the weather. We did the best that we could, but it was the first time that I met Daniel. I was blown away with just how incredibly nice you were. You came in, and that's on the top of my list of my requirements for friendship. Starts out with you just have to be a nice person. And so you fit that perfectly. And then we spent the next week together, and unbeknownst to me, I always have open back ends on when I do things. I have an open on the back end. And so you guys were like, well, hey, you want to join us down here in Texas, or and next thing you know, we jumped on over to the Kiamichis and then down to Texas, and it was fantastic. So yeah,
no, that was amazing.
So how were you even involved in this in 2010?
Yeah, so I mean, I've always had an interest in the subject matter. I mean, we've all seen the Patterson Gimlin film. We've all seen, the documentaries, the In Search of stuff, all that kind of thing. So I think that always interested me early on. And I'm a bit of a film and TV and monster dork. I love all that kind of stuff. I mean, I've managed to get myself into that industry. So that's I have worked for many years at WETA Workshop, which is a special effects company here in New Zealand, and we create armor, weapons, and creatures and all that kind of stuff for movies and TV and that kind of thing, and including Lord of the Rings. That's what I've kind of been associated with most strongly, which is what's brought me so many amazing opportunities. That's what has linked me with some of these amazing things. I've got to work with incredible people. I've learned a huge amount. I'm just one person as part of a much, much bigger team. But also as part of that has sometimes come the opportunity to travel and talk about the work that we do. And I've taken full advantage of that to try and link up with folks like yourself who've been very, very kind to host me and take me out and go and explore areas that they have, have experiences in, because I'm just curious. I just want to know more, right? I want to know about these things. I want to know, one, I want to know if they're real. And then obviously two, the ideal is to try and have an experience of some kind of confirmation experience, for that. And then just learn as much as possible. So there was a stint, a patch there where we were trying to get a TV show off the ground that was going to be like a scripted reality TV show. So it was supposed to look like it was reality TV, but it was all going to be scripted. And that the audience was going to be in on the joke. It was going to be kind of fun. And the idea was every episode we were following this fictional cryptozoologist character, and he would find creatures and we would make the creatures, and so every episode he'd meet and he'd find a Yeti or he'd find a Sasquatch or a Loch Ness monster, all that kind of stuff. It was just going to be kind of fun. And in the process of doing research for that show, I went down the rabbit hole online and started finding all this cool stuff out of it, and it rekindled that interest in the Bigfoot mystery to me. And that show didn't end up happening. It never got off the ground, but as so many do. But I just kept looking and kept reading and kept listening to podcasts and watching documentaries, and then I started reaching out to people and so when the opportunities came to actually to go to the States, and if I had work to do, I would go to do my work, and then I'd plan it so that I had a few days extra and I could go exploring and meet up with folks like yourself. I've been hosted in many different places around the country. That 2010 trip, that was like my, I call myself a Bigfoot. Like, I don't call myself a Bigfoot researcher because I don't get out enough to be able to do that. I'm kind of an enthusiast, or like I like to call myself a Bigfoot tourist, because basically that 2010 trip, I had a month, and my wife was incredibly understanding. She let me disappear for a month, and I went and went Bigfooting with different folks in all different areas. In Alabama and as you say, in Atoka, Oklahoma, where I met you, and then we went out to into Texas, and we went out to the Kiamichis, and then I was in California after that. So amazing, really lovely. I have to thank all the lovely people who hosted me in those different places and extended an invitation for me to come and hang out with them. Anything that ever happened was not due to me just wandering into a random patch of woods. It was always because I was there with people who'd done the legwork and had experience and knew where they were and had gone to these places because there were things that happened there. So that was a really cool thing. So that was a pretty formative trip, that 2010 trip with you. And then I've been back every excuse since. I've been back many times since then and gone to different areas. And most of the time you go out, you have a wonderful time in the woods with friends, and that's a great experience. You see lots of amazing animals that I would never see here in New Zealand. Experience, nature, different types of forests and mountains and that kind of stuff, and that's always a good time. But occasionally, something really cool happens, right? And you're like, "What was that?" And those are the times that you kind of really, you can't go in expecting them. But man, they're awesome when they do happen. So, and I'm sure we'll talk about a bunch of those today.
Well, what there's one specific thing that I would like to talk about that I was remembering myself, and that is when you and I were down in Texas with Mike, down by the Neches River, or we were on a private property. I remember you and I went to a neighboring house that was empty, and we found a scorpion in the sink,
That's right,
in a bathroom sink, when we were just looking around. But when we first pulled up to this property, we heard a knock on a ridge, and you and I both acknowledged it. Like, was that a knock that we just heard? So we got kind of excited. But I want to talk specifically about something that happened on that trip that I really don't have any answers for. And that is, there was a trail leaving south out of our little campsite that went to a tree stand, a hunter's tree stand. And one night we were all around the campfire, and of course, Mike Hall, I'm talking about Mike Hall, but Mike Hall was a tobacco chewer. So he had a tobacco tin, specific brand of tobacco that he chewed on. And so the next morning we were out walking on this trail south of, going down towards that tree stand just to look around, and I saw a tobacco tin laying on the ground. And
I remember that. And you were going to chew him out about it. You were going to tell him off about for littering.
I did chew him out because I was like, damn it, Mike. I said, don't be littering on this guy's property. And Mike's like, what are you talking about? And I said, well, that's your tobacco tin. I said, that's your tobacco. And I'm not going to have it. I mean, I was very adamant about taking care of this property. I said, you're not going to be out here littering it up with your crap. And so we pick up the tin and it's closed up.
Yeah.
So we open it and there's tobacco in it. And we go back to camp, and he says, Randy, that is not my tin. My tin is in my coat pocket, folded up in a chair laying next to the fire from last night. So we go back to camp. We open up the chair. We pull out his jacket, unfold it, and he reaches in the pocket. And that's when he's like, that is my tin. But how did it get out of him? Now, it could have been a raccoon. I'm going to say that it could have been a raccoon, except for the fact that why would a raccoon go through that much work to get it out of that pocket within that folded up chair, go somewhere down and not ever get it opened and see what was in it? Because why, it must have been able to smell the tobacco to even want it, and to carry it that far away and not open it, and then put it back together and then ditch it. None of that makes any sense to me if it was a raccoon.
But yeah, I don't know what else I mean, I can't jump to the conclusion that it was a giant hairy ape that walked in and took it, but but it was weird. It was really odd because we both saw him chewing out of that tin the night before. So how it got from his pocket to the other part was kind of weird. I agree. There was a strange thing.
So whatever took that had to have wanted to know what was inside it because it could probably smell it. So if it opened it up and examined it, why did it put it back together and toss it on the ground back together? A raccoon would just open it up, taste a little bit of it, and just leave it as is. They wouldn't put it all back together, and it just didn't make any sense.
It's in that weird area. Who knows what that was? Yeah, we'll never know. We can only speculate.
Right. But yeah,
kind of cool.
So,
but you hit on a good point there, though, which is one of my favorite things about these going out on these trips is when you have something curious happen, be it that's a good example, and then you start doing the problem solving and you try to figure it out, right? And I love that. I really get a kick out of that because sometimes you're left with I don't know. And then other times you can figure it out, and that's really cool. Like you figure out what the real answer is. Like we had situations. I remember when we were up in the Sierra Nevada mountains, and we'll talk more about this soon, but I'll just tell this little side story. One of the really fun things there was I was up in the Sierra Nevadas, and it was call blasting the Ohio Howl, which if anybody doesn't know what that is just like I think was it Matt Moneymaker I think recorded that back in like 2000 or something like that.
Yeah.
And a purported possible Sasquatch call. So the idea with the call blasting is you get a big loudspeaker, you blast it out, and then you listen and you see if you get any kind of response. And so anyway, we were up there doing that, and I'll tell more, as I say, I'll tell more about the cool things that happened on that trip later. But this is a little side story that we would blast that, and sometimes you would hear in the distance this like high-pitched kind of weird noise, which is like, that's odd. And it didn't sound like an animal. Like it wasn't an animal. And it would go on for far too long for it to be an animal. But it was just like this weird high-pitched whine. It almost sounded to me like a train whistle, like way off in the distance somewhere. And I'm like, that is so odd. What is that? And, Kathy said to me, there are no trains around here. There's nothing like that. So we're figuring, and over days we would hear this sometimes when we would do these call blasts. And then one time, we ran into a bunch of cattle that were grazing. There was cattle that somebody had let loose there. They've got bells on and they wander around and they basically, I guess, help
Free
keep the
range,
understory out of control.
free
Yeah,
range.
so,
Yeah.
so that there's less fire risk. And we would hear them and they would see us and they'd run off and you'd hear ding 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 from the cowbells as they run off. But there was one time we call blasted and we didn't know there was some cattle nearby, and you hear them take off down into the valley with the bells dingling, and then as they got further and further away, that bell turned into a single note because it was echoing around off all the hillsides, and it just became this long note. And I'm like, that's what we were hearing. Whenever we call blast, the cows way down in the valley below hear us freak out and run away, and the noise was just that cowbell that just started off as ding ding ding, but by the time it's echoed around in all the valleys, it's just a single note. So that it's little things like that were really, really cool. We had another instance, and it's one of those moments where it's like it's not Bigfoot related, it's just a cool thing you figure out. I was in the Washita Mountains, and we were staying camping in a teepee that one of the guys had erected, and we didn't really have much activity or anything like that for that particular week we were there. But every time we would go in the teepee, we'd be in there and we'd hear whap, rattle, 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 rattle. Like something would hit, and sometimes you'd even see it. You see something impact the teepee and then roll down the side, and I'm like, what the heck is that? And we're like, now the thing you would think of is, oh wow, there's a Bigfoot outside throwing pebbles at the teepee. Like that's what somebody might jump to the conclusion of, but we couldn't support that hypothesis unless we had some kind of evidence. And so every time there'd be a thwap, I'd run up and run outside and go and have a look around, and I could never find the stone or anything like that had been thrown, which I'm like, this is so weird. And then one time I was lying in there just having a little wee relax because it was quite hot outside, and I saw the impact right above my head on the teepee, and I saw something roll down. I'm like, right, I know exactly where that is. So I jumped up, ran around the outside, and here's this huge, great big like caterpillar the size of my finger. And what we figured out was every time we went in the teepee, the birds would come out and start working in the trees looking for prey. And these caterpillars that were way up in the leaves, anytime the birds would do that, the caterpillars would drop and they'd hit the side of the teepee and roll down and then fall away. And so that's why we were never finding stones or anything like that. But like it was like you could so easily have told yourself a story and said, oh man, every time I went inside the teepee, Bigfoot would throw rocks at it. And it's like, no, that's not what it is. But it was so fun finding those answers, like figuring it out. I really get a kick out of that kind of stuff.
And not many people want to find an answer that's not Bigfoot.
Oh, sure, because we want the exciting thing, right? And I'm there too. I have to acknowledge whenever I'm out there, I have confirmation bias, right? I'm out there looking for this thing, and so that's what I want everything to be, but it isn't. And you're only telling yourself stories, so you. But
Well,
it
I
makes
know.
it all the more cool when something really cool does happen, and you just can't find another solution for it. And you're like, well, maybe that was.
Well, I mean, I know, Daniel, you're a busy guy, and you probably haven't had many opportunities to watch many of my videos. I try to be as scientific minded as I can. Uh, but did you ever see the video that we put out where we marked the rocks that were thrown back at us?
Yeah, how cool is that? How
Yeah.
cool is that? And Randy, I watch all your videos, dude. I'm a Bigfoot junkie. I'm on like when I'm working, if I'm drawing or something like that, I can sometimes have videos playing in the background. I'm looking for anything Bigfoot related, see what people are doing, learn what people are up to. So I watch all your stuff, absolutely.
Well, that night that we marked the rocks, that was such an incredible uh thing that happened that is so simple. And when that happened, the moment and we were unable to find any of the marked rocks until we both said, well, one of the rocks hit the Polaris because we heard it hit the plastic. So when we're over there by the Polaris looking around, we find one right by one of the tires that had a mark on it. And so it only took one rock that we had marked and placed up there to know that rocks are being thrown.
Yeah, yeah,
So
and that suddenly, well, what are you dealing with, right? It's something with these. What throws rocks? It's either people or it's something that has the ability to throw a rock, and there aren't too many animals that can do that. It's exciting
and
stuff, right? It gets the blood pumping.
Well, like that one video I put out about behaviors, about they were probably piggybacking down the trail, that we wouldn't have been able to come up with that plausible explanation if it wasn't for knowing that they were just at our camp table. And we wouldn't have known they were at our camp table without an audio of a recorder of something at our camp table when we came back down to camp. And when we eventually had our encounter out there on the trail with that young one where Shane walked out to it, then we wouldn't have known the probability of them piggybacking, jumping each other, following us down the trail. I love putting patterns together and having the ability to say, okay, they were at the table at this point. And then when we got there and come down with Dan Nedrolo, we come down the trail and we see that little one out in the field that Shane was able to walk out to. How did it get to that point? Well, now we know from point A to point B, they were probably, and since they were separated, they were probably piggybacking and jumping along the trail to keep their eye on us. I just love putting the patterns together, and because at least when you have an idea of their patterns, then you know what you can pay attention to in the future.
Right, and that you and if you can predict behavior based on what you've experienced in the past, then maybe you can put yourself in a position to get really good evidence or have an experience or something like that. And that's, I'm always thinking about that. I would try weird stuff, and I had like little side mirrors attached to my hat so that I could look back over my shoulder with one eye without turning my head, and I mean, just dumb stuff.
Well,
Never worked. But like,
I've got that picture of you and me standing there, me with the Coca-Cola shirt on, and you with your little glasses on, with your little mirror. Matter of fact, when I edit this later, I'm going to throw that picture in so people can see that that's exactly what
that'd
you're
be
talking
fun.
about.
That'd be fun. Yeah. I mean, but you've got to try stuff like that. Whenever I'm driving up, like some of the times when I was with you and we were up in the mountains rolling around in your Polaris, or with other folks, like when I've had the I've been lucky enough to visit Area X, famous Area X with the NAWAC, and I'm always sitting in the truck. I'm sitting looking back behind for as long as I can without getting a sore neck. But because you often hear about these things standing off the trail and somebody passes and they step out to watch them go by. I mean, I'm just things like that. You try.
So your friendship with Kathy Strain and Bob Strain, and uh, your experiences down on Area X. Uh, as you know, I'm very close to that area.
Yeah.
Even when I'm haven't gotten to the area where I'm at now, that I call Area X20 or whatever. But I was still only 10 miles away on another ridge. I spent 20 years on some of those ridges, which are very close to Area X. So it doesn't take a scientist to know that they're on just about every ridge down there, even if you're within 10 miles of Area X, and probably bumping shoulders with some of the same creatures, just making their rounds in those areas down there. So it's really a numbers game where you just keep going to those areas, and you're going to get lucky if you're paying attention. So
Yep.
can you give us some Area X insights or Area
Sure.
X experiences?
Sure. So I was invited to go and join them down there because as you mentioned, Kathy Strain and Bob Strain. I've been friends with them for years, and we'll tell these stories too. But we had a number of really cool things that we experienced together up in the Sierra Nevadas in 2011, 2012, and 2013. 3 years in a row at this one site. But when we were up there in 2012 and 2013, they were also telling me about the crazy experiences that they had down in the Ouachita Mountains in southeast Oklahoma, right up on the border of Arkansas, and with the NAWAC, they were there. This research site they had down there on private land that they had identified as a site for a potential camera trap operation. Alton Higgins, who basically founded, he was I think the director emeritus of the group at the time, and they were using it. They had an amazing camera trap operation there for like 5-6 years, something like that, maybe more. They still have cameras down there today, but the focus has shifted. But they were having really intensive encounters in 2011, 2012. And so when I heard about those, I was like, wow, that sounds really cool. I'd love to go visit there. And they're like, well, you should come. You should come and visit. And so the group very, very kindly extended an invitation to me as an independent to come down and join them in 2014. And that was a wild week. I've been back 2 or 3 times since then and camped in different parts of the mountains down there, never the exact same spot. And we've had some interesting potential stuff happen, but nothing, super engaging. But that week in 2014 was bonkers. That shifted the dial for me, the needle, if you're talking about, whether you believe or don't believe or whatever it is, like that shifted it way over that. We had, it was a constant week of rocks getting tossed, as you've experienced. I should set this up properly for folks who don't know too much about this area. As you've obviously talked about and you've shown before, it's a very, very remote area. It's hard to get into without a four-wheel drive, and there are certain areas that are easy to get to, and then there are certain areas that are hard. And the area where where the NAWAC had its operation is a hard to get to area, and intentionally so, because they value their privacy. And for that matter, I would ask. I didn't ask permission to talk about where this is located, and I know they value their privacy. So I'd ask you, please don't. I know you have your wonderful maps, and I love watching your videos and seeing the maps, but please don't put a map of exactly where their location is, because that would
Right.
I was a guest, and I would feel like that would be a betrayal of that trust. So, but I mean, the whole Washita Mountain area has kind of become known as Area X, because they called that particular site Area X because the group had research sites in a few different places. They had Area Y, Area X, and they dropped the other various sites because this was the one that was producing results the most consistently. They had a camera trap operation going on there for years, and while the cameras never ever captured anything that would be considered to be evidence of Sasquatch, captured lots of other animals, but never anything Sasquatch. The cameras were sometimes getting messed with, and the guys that were going in, the teams that were going in and staying for 3 or 4 days to, change the batteries, pull out the SD cards, all that kind of stuff, they would start to have encounters when they were down there. And so the focus of the group shifted to being less about yes, they put the cameras out and try to capture evidence, but it became more about, let's keep teams down there for as long as possible, because it seemed like the longer teams stayed, the more the activity ramped up. And so this valley that they were in had a constellation of cabins that owned by different people in there, that the team could stay in. Teams could stay in, and a stream that ran past it. But the thing that struck me when I went in there was, man, was it rich! Like, huge diversity of different tree types. Lots of nut-bearing trees, animals everywhere. Fish in the stream, raccoons, squirrels running around, little foxes living there who would come and hang out at the camp, bugs everywhere, snakes. I mean, it's an amazing area, absolutely full of stuff, of cool stuff. And so it's no surprise to me that if there is such a thing as Sasquatch, it would be in a remote valley like this. It would take you. The Washitas themselves are kind of out of the way. There's not a lot of big towns or anything near them, right? And so then by the time you get in there, and then you've got another hour. Once you leave the paved road, you've got another hour driving along these rough roads, and some of them really, really rough, before you finally get to the area that these guys called X, where all this stuff was happening. So that being the case, you could pretty comfortably rule out that there were people down there hoaxing, especially when the teams down there were there for months at a time. You had people tagging in and out. So there was continuous, almost near continuous groups of researchers down in that area observing for weeks, sometimes months at a time, and yet activity was often ongoing and so intense that sometimes, like that. One thing that those guys did, which is a fantastic habit, I know you do it as well. It's something that Kathy Strain and Bob Strain drilled into me when I went out with them. Note taking, just relentless note taking. Document everything, because you forget stuff, and if you have these notes, even mundane stuff, you can go back later and refer to things and maybe build connections and that kind of stuff. So they did relentless note taking, but sometimes the activity was so intense, like the number of rocks coming in. my friend Brian, when he was down there, he was a note taker once, and I remember him telling me there was sometimes he was down there, and he's like, there are more rocks coming in now than I can actually just like keep up with in my notes. Like it was that intense. Those guys were having full-on sightings regularly. Really, really intensive stuff. Some kind of intimidating behaviors sometimes, which I think the intensity of the behavior down there, I think could be a couple of things. One, I think you could be dealing with curious juveniles who maybe want to come in and have a close, because they were having really close approaches, like animals coming up, sneaking up. You'd be at the fire ring and you'd get up and go to walk away, and something would jump up and run off. And you're like, ah! You're like, oh my God, there was something like mere feet behind our vehicles, or right up close, in some cases, almost within touching distance, and we never heard them arrive or anything like that, like really intensive stuff. And then other times there were just flat out intimidation behaviors, where the guys might be doing something around the camp area, and this tree start getting shaken, or big rocks come in. I mean, those guys, they had rocks the sizes of baseballs come in occasionally. Or just impact noises, these huge, loud impact noises that one of the guys in the group described as like sounding like somebody was throwing a Volkswagen down the creek, like those were, sphincter tightening stuff. We didn't have anything quite as intense as that happened when I was there, thankfully, but we had a lot of rock throws, and we had responses to the stuff we were doing. So we would go out, and do activities to try and prompt activities. We would go out and make a lot of noise, or we'd go out and hike, and we'd drop people down. The sort of, somebody would drop off the back of the tailgate of the truck and hide, and the rest would walk along in the hopes that if something was following, you might bust them and stuff. And we had all kinds of things happen, like where people had visuals. I was the only person in our group that week who didn't go home with a definitive visual. Everyone else saw one in broad daylight. Man. Yeah, that's okay. Just maybe want to come back. But like, 2 days before I got there, Kathy saw the animal they call Old Grey, because this is an animal they've seen so many times. In fact, there may be more than one of them, but regularly they've seen basically an animal that looks just like Paddy from the Patterson-Gimlin film, but pale gray, almost white, huge, heavy, barrel-chested, enormous big animal, 7 feet plus, maybe 8 feet tall. And Kathy saw that animal broad daylight in the morning through a window in the vegetation, like 2 days before I got there. Daryl Collier, who was there with us, had a couple of really intense sightings and encounters while we were there that week. The closest I got to a sighting, I mean, other than having rocks thrown in, which is pretty convincing, rocks are pretty convincing. The closest I got to a sighting when I was down there was we were sitting around the campfire. I was showing some pictures on my laptop of stuff I'd been doing, and it was just on dusk. And suddenly we hear this loud cracking and crashing noise, and we look down the trail, and out past the cabins, we see the top of a tree come down, probably, I don't know, 100 yards from where we are, maybe a little bit further. And the guys had experienced a number of situations where they'd be doing something and a tree would get pushed over next to camp or something like that, or trees get thrashed around. They even had one instance where the top of a tree was thrashing around, and you could see an animal in the tree, some kind of dark animal thrashing the top of the tree around, and then the top of the tree breaks and falls, and the animal falls with it and then takes off up the hill. This kind of stuff was going on. So when this tree comes down near camp, Daryl just like grabs his rifle and busts over there at top speed to go and see if he could see something. And he runs over there, and he hears, when he gets to roughly where the tree came down, he hears an animal fleeing to the north. He hears it crashing off through the vegetation. He pursues it, not with any real expectation that he's ever going to actually catch it, but he pursues it to the north, and he hears it curve around, and it starts to head back east, back sort of above the camp area and above the cabins, to the north of the cabins. So he's following that. Meanwhile, Brian and I had wandered along the trail, and we were trying to find the exact tree that had come down, when we hear to our south a wood knock, and we immediately turn. And as I say, it was just on dusk. There were the area we were looking through was lots of very, very small trees, lots of little, this sort of wide, all lined up. And so you could sort of shift this way or that, and you could get avenues of visibility through the trees, or it would be completely blocked. I looked down there, and I thought I got some sense of movement back down in there. And Brian's like, "Oh my God, did you see that?" And what he saw was not the same thing as I saw. He saw a tree peeker. He saw like the classic like animal look out from behind a bigger tree back in there and then go back. So we yelled at Daryl, who is heading to the north. He's like, "Hey, we've got an animal here to the south." So Daryl comes busting back. He goes racing off in that direction. And it runs off, and he gives chase. He doesn't see it, but he hears it. And meanwhile, the whole time this is happening, the animal that circled around to the north of us has gone back behind the cabin and is now throwing rocks in over the cabin. Kathy's back at the cabin, and she's seeing the rocks coming in and landing near the fire pit and where the vehicles are parked. Just in ridiculous, intense stuff like that. Like the tree comes down, you run over there, you don't immediately assume it's going to be an ape or something like that, right? But yet this happens, and the wood knocks, and the visual, and the rocks being thrown. And what it seemed like to me was that there was a certain amount of coordination, right? Like if somebody got busted, like the guy, like Daryl was giving chase to the guy heading north, somebody to the south does a wood knock. We all turn and look that way. The guy at the north gets away, you know. We run over that way, somebody's throwing rocks back at the cabin. You know, hey, call your dudes back. You know, it's like you bust one, the others come to its help, to its aid. So that was really, really interesting. And again, having not seen one, I'm still looking at all this stuff going, man, I'm racking my brains to try and come up with other explanations. The only other explanation I can think of is somebody's in there jacking with us. But man, if they have balls of steel, because, you know, some of the guys in our group were packing some pretty heavy heat. And so that's a pretty dangerous thing to want to do, to come and try and hoax people doing that. Plus, the terrain is very unforgiving. It's hard to run through that stuff. So if there were people coming down there jacking with us, man, hats off to them.
Well, I mean, you know, I think you and I both, we can go ahead and we throw that out there that it could be people, but we can go ahead and just take that off as because of the remoteness of some of the locations that you and I have been into. When myself talking about a location in southern Missouri that we call the 400, but we have such overlaps of similar behaviors that has to be strategically used by them, and that is a given at this point for myself and even for you, I'm sure. For Kathy and Bob Strain, we know that now these things are working together in tandem in groups, and I think I've laid it out enough of these strategic maneuvers that they specifically position themselves now. When I showed from those piggyback jumping scenarios where they're doing it on purpose and staying separate for a specific reason, and that is one needs to be put itself in a different spot in case it's needed as a diversion.
Yep.
We have to know that that is now a pattern that is built in to what they're trying to do, where they specifically position themselves in different locations just in case my buddy needs me to save it. And I think we're starting to. So now if we can kind of prepare for that in ways, which is still very difficult, because of they can put themselves, they slowly move themselves into strategic spots that will give them the upper hand. For them, I'm telling you, I'm trying to get to that next step where, and it's not easy because there's a lot of fear. The fear part is hard to get past.
Yep.
And I think I'm getting to that point where I can learn to, if I want to get to that spot, then you're going to have to eat some of that fear. You're just going to have to eat it and try to let your equipment pick up. But you're going to have to get yourself into that spot where you have to get past that fear, and that is the hard
It is hard. I mean,
part to do.
you know, it's easy when you're sitting in your chair at home. You go, you know what, I want to know, so I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. But when you're out there in the dark and maybe you're alone, so you also have to be like, there's fear, but there's also rational caution. You know, you do not want to put yourself in a position where you could injure yourself. Nothing to do with Sasquatch. You just injure yourself because you rolled your ankle and now you're screwed because you're in the middle of nowhere with no backup. Like, you do have to be careful. But then, as I say, it's easy to be all brave when you're in your chair, but then when you're in the dark out there by yourself and you think there's a huge, very large animal, whether it's a Sasquatch or a bear or a mountain lion, you know, come across sign of all of those animals out there, that's a different situation. And it is scary. And you can rationalize it all you want, like, well, they've had plenty of opportunities to rub me out if they wanted to, and they never did. Yeah, not those times, but maybe this time. They,
Right,
if
right.
if these animals are what we think they are, they absolutely have the capability, if they want to just, you know, pick you up by your legs and your feet, swing you in a circle and hit your head against every tree, and that could happen. So
Well, trying to get to the next part for myself, and I hope, and and I hope for my sake, and maybe even for yours and Kathy and Bob, if they should happen to watch this interview with you, and you guys are friends with them, I'm friends with them on Facebook, but I haven't shared a campfire with them. I hope in the future, maybe because of this conversation here, that we can maybe all come together at some point. Hopefully you guys can understand that my pursuit of this is very similar to y'all's pursuit of it, and I'm not trying to step on people's toes. I often do, but I'm really not trying to.
we'll do.
I do it in a way, and I do it in a way where I'm hoping you guys invite me, because I want to be invited, and I hope you guys can see by my passion for this and my pursuit of the knowledge of this, and trying to capture one on thermal and video and things like that. That's really what I'm trying to do. But it means hoping to be invited to some of these same joint ventures where we can pull our equipment together and talk about our tactics.
Yeah.
And for me, I think having the equipment set up and prepared in a way where, say, like where my camera, my thermal works like a periscope out of the top of my tent, like it would be in a submarine. So, and I know the field of view, that if I can set this up, one of my goals are at this point, when I'm alone or with just a select number of people, to know where my camera is fixed and stay within that field of view. And I want to put myself out there completely unarmed and
As
with no
bait.
equipment. But if I know that I'm within that field of view, that my camera by periscope is filming, then I can go out within this field of view and be completely naked, not naked in body, but naked in equipment, uh, down to maybe just my underwear, so that these creatures or beings that are so attuned to their survival, but curiosity keeps them coming around. I want to position myself, and it's not easy, because you have to overcome the fear part. I want
Yeah.
to, but if I know that I'm being in a field of view that's being filmed with my thermal camera, it might make it easier or more palatable for me to get myself out there and sit down in a vulnerable position and try to encourage some type of interaction where they would step out knowing that I'm harmless at that point, but
Mm.
I'm not harmless in the fact that I know my camera is back there filming where I'm at. So I'm still being conniving and trying to use trickery. But
Yeah.
but I think that might be my next step, to try to get past that part where I can get out there and sit my butt down and be vulnerable, and
Yeah.
hope that they take the next step and expose themselves in a way that shows that we're trying to
Well,
communicate.
curiosity seems to be a weakness. Like that's something that the various different groups that I've been out with in different places, that seems to be a consistent thing, is that these animals prefer to remain in a tactically advantageous position. They'll generally have the high ground. They'll generally always have cover, all that kind of stuff. But they will sometimes come close, and they will sometimes risk exposure out of curiosity to see what's going on. That seems to be part of the picture of this animal. If it, as I say, I know for you it's not a question anymore, because you've had your confirmation experience. I've had lots of tentative experiences. So for me, I have to keep my skepticals on. I have but I believe the people. I believe you when you tell your story. I believe it. We know, but Kathy, Bob, my friends, Brian Brown, everybody else that I've hung out with, I believe their stories. So there's something, and that's what keeps me going back and hoping for more. I should say too, when I go out to these places, I'm a guest generally. I did join the NAWAC for a couple of years, and I went on one other expedition with them out there to a different spot, and we didn't have much happen that particular year. I'm not part of that group anymore. I'm still friends with a lot of the folks, but like I'm not in constant communication. I haven't actually. You talking about, but us talking about Kathy and Bob here, it makes me want to reach out to them because I haven't talked to them for probably a couple of years. So I should reach out to them again. Most recently, obviously, there's been the whole period with COVID-19. Travel wasn't happening. It was very difficult to get out. So I haven't been out a lot lately. The last trip I did manage to get out to, which was the first one in 6 years, was in 2023. And I went back with a group of my friends. We're just sort of a little private group. We're not a public one. We call ourselves WARG, Wood Ape Research Group, which is kind of a play on the notion of wargs, which are, they're creatures in Lord of the Rings as well. So we're also big nerds. We went out to an area fairly close to where you camp, and I've seen some of the same locations in your videos that we've been to. We did not have anything that I would consider definitive in the week that we were there. But a bunch of the guys on other occasions have had really compelling stuff, daylight visuals, interactions with stuff there.
Well,
so
I
it seems
do
to
know
be an area that just keeps producing.
I do know you and I touched base in because of my last camp spot was one of the areas that you were at.
Literally the same spot.
And it was the fifth day. There were other incidental things that you could hear and possibly, but there was a specific thing on the fifth night that I can say for myself, absolutely, there was something there that was
Right.
making itself known and doing specific things on the fifth night. So it took 5 nights for something to happen. Did they know I was there all along? Probably. Why did it take the fifth night? Was it because other people had left and I was now there by myself? Is that why they decided to go ahead and make themselves? Who knows? But I'm going to put this open invitation out to you and Bob
Thank
and
you.
Kathy specifically, that if you guys ever want to join up and we culminate our experiences and try to proceed and set up a couple of tactics that I think I'm if when I go back to that spot, I am going to specifically not do so much gallivanting around and going out. I am going to, now that I know that it could take up to 5 days or longer for them to finally, I'm going to try to specifically set up specific things within the camp scenario where I get myself out of the tent in the middle of something happening that I can hear with my parabolics and my headsets. And when I know that there's breakings and throwings, and I know there's something close enough to do that's when I'm going to have to get myself out there in my boxers, in flip-flops, totally vulnerable, if I want to instigate that next step of, if I can say, okay, here I am, I'm exposed, and you are here, and for whatever reason you're doing what you're doing while I'm in the tent because I think you want me to step out, and so here I am. Let's make that next step. I'm ready for that.
I wonder
So
if that is what the rock throwing is about. If you're in a tent or if you're in a cabin, I think some this is hypothetical, but and a number of folks have talked about this, but yeah, it seems to be like they want to provoke a reaction, right? They want you to see you come scurrying outside, maybe,
I
just
think it's
to
more
keep
than
tabs on where you are.
I think it's more than that, because they are so adept at nonverbal communications. For them, it's a type of communication that we just haven't tapped into yet. They do rock throws and taps and clacks to each other and whistles, and they're talking to each other in specific ways that they've mastered, that we're only catching glimpses of. So if we were to interject ourselves into that by stepping out and trying to be a part of that, I think the rock throws are a communication, because if they wanted to collapse your tent with a bowling ball sized rock,
Sure.
they certainly could.
But
So
I don't think it's that.
that's not what they're doing. They're doing
No.
something else, so if once we can tap into what they're trying to do and they're okay with that, then that's when we will bridge that gap, I think.
It's interesting. You're talking about the fifth night or the third night or the fourth night or whatever, and certainly in my experience and talking with my friends who've had many, many more experiences than me, it seems like it does sometimes take occasionally somebody walks into camp and there's one right there. That one of the guys in the WAC, that exact thing happened. He walked into camp and there was one standing right there, and it just sort of gave him the stink eye and walked away and left him, stand there shaking. But most of the time, it seems like activity ramps up when you're there for a few days. And I think there's a couple of things that can be. One is it takes them a while to discover you're there. Or two, they're like, oh yeah, there's a human there. That's so cool. We'll just avoid that spot for a few days, and then they'll go away. Because most people, when they go camping, right, they come out for a weekend and then they leave. So if you're a wood ape in that area, grazing, browsing around, looking for food, you're like, okay, I just avoid that patch while those guys are there for a while, and then they'll leave. And then when they don't leave, they're like visitors. After 3 days, they're like fish. They get stinky. You want them to go, but they're still there. Then, well, now you've got to kind of try and either come and give them the subtle hint to move along, shake the trees a little bit or something like that, or maybe you just have to keep an eye on them. You're like, well, this guy's not going anywhere. I need to watch him. So then you've got the camp watchers, the ones who come in and watch from behind a tree or something like that. And so many of the encounters that people I know have had seem to be those situations where after 2 or 3 days there's something watching your camp, and it doesn't necessarily interact, but it's keeping an eye on you, and you are lucky enough to see it through a thermal or you catch a glimpse. The other thing I think, and I am a proponent of of walking a lot, because if I look back at the records that we've got from and I'm not just talking NAWAC, but other groups that I've been in as well, including the war group I'm in now, when we go out and hike, for like 5 to 10 miles a day and come back to camp, those are the days that stuff starts happening.
You pull them back
because you pull them back. You encounter them while you're out, and then they follow you back to see what I think. I think that way you increase because otherwise you're just dropping a pin into the forest in the middle of nowhere and hoping that happens to be one close by. But if you're out doing stuff, also you're then potentially, I think, something that needs to be watched, because you are not just doing predictable stuff hanging around your camp. You're going out and they're like, well, whoa, where is this guy now? We need to keep an eye on him, in case he's close to our young or something like that. I wonder if it's something like that. But I mean, we can only guess, right? But those are the patterns that you and I have both observed that seem to suggest something. Yeah.
Yeah. I am. And of course you're right. And so, if we have those things happen, when I go out alone and I'm trying to set up these little tents and these little bait tactics,
so cool.
and things like that, I mean, I'm always looking over my shoulder, and I'm just like, I mean, it is tentative, man. I mean, there's a tension that you create yourself. You create it all yourself. The tension of, the anxiety and the stress of being alone and out there in a creek bottom, and and just, I mean, I know that I create it myself. It doesn't. I enjoy it. It's hard to say to people that you enjoy something like that, because it's an adrenaline rush that you hope comes to a point where you create that yourself, but you have to go through a lot of stressful moments that you build up on yourself that I can't explain it to people. But
I find myself so conflicted, because I'll find myself in a situation like that in the dark by myself. I'm listening intently. There's little things happening, which is probably just, an armadillo running by or something like that, right? But yeah, and I'm like, oh man, I really want it to be like something else, but also I really don't. And I hope I get out of here alive. And yet also I really want something to happen. And then and you get through it and you're like, oh yeah, well, there was nothing. That was fine. I feel good about it now because the sun's out and everything's okay. And then the next night you go and put yourself in the exact same situation again, and it's that mix of really wanting something to happen, but also kind of hoping if it does, it's not too scary. I would love to see one of these creatures in broad daylight and have that confirmation experience for myself, and be able to look it in the eye and see its facial expression and recognize its personhood, at some level. By the same token, I don't know if I'd ever be able to sleep again if I ever looked one of these things in the eye. It's like be careful what you wish for, right?
Well, Daniel,
and I'm sure the fact that there aren't like thousands of dead people everywhere in the forest, that if these animals are real, they are resoundingly peaceful and discreet, and most of the time they retreat from a situation rather than ever engage. But by the same token, you might catch one on a bad day, and that could be it. I think they would have the capacity to. You hear some of these aggressive stories, and I'm sure some of them are true, because I think there's some situations that could be. Now, most of the time, it's probably just intimidation. Probably most of the time, it's just get out. But there may also be. I mean, I think there's a guy in Alaska, man. Hearing his story, Fred Roll. I was watching his videos. When you hear his story, do you know the guy I'm talking about? He was
No.
in a when he was in a cabin way, way out in the middle of nowhere with a couple of relatives. And
Oh,
if
the
that
fishing
encounter that
shack.
he relates, yeah, if that encounter that he relates is true, that was not an intimidation encounter. That was a predatory encounter, and those guys were lucky to get out alive. And so
Yes.
I have to feel like that situation can happen too. But my suspicion is, in situations like the Washitas or the other place I've been to where we had stuff happen in the Sierra Nevadas, those are those are not situations, I think, where you've got a Sasquatch that's going to try and hurt a person, right? I mean, they've experienced people too many times. I think they probably know to keep their distance. They're very, very, they're timid. They're curious, but they seem to be timid. But then yeah, who knows? The other situation, I think a dangerous situation, it's like any animal, right? There, you can observe bears from a distance. You may even be able to get close to them and everything's fine. And then one day there's a bad situation. You do have to be careful.
Well, when it came to the 400, I learned so much more at that property there because of what was happening, and then what the audio would reveal, and then our own encounters would reveal, and how those were interconnected as far as the things that were happening. But what I learned with leaving a recorder on the table is how often something would come into camp just to examine the stuff on the table. And that
Right.
was the sole purpose of entering camp, is to just look. And only with my own eyesight would I only see one or two things out of place, that later, listening to the audio, I could say, yes, they were at the table. And I'd noticed it with my eyes that one thing was out of place, that shouldn't have been out of place. If there had been a raccoon on the table, if there was a raccoon on the table, you'd know it, because everything would just kind of be flopped over everywhere, and a box full of food would have been torn apart. None of that happened, but because of a box of plastic utensils laying on its side where it's normally standing straight up, was the only thing that I noticed different. And then listening to the recorder, you hear something going through every box on the table as it's
Interesting.
going down the table. And also, you can hear us coming back to camp, and you can hear whatever was there leaving as we're coming back. So in our minds, we don't even know what's happening at the camp table. We just come back to camp and everything's fine. We get in our tents,
Right.
we talk around the campfire. We didn't know that something was there as we're coming back. And so what happened is, when we listened to that audio, it left the campsite, and it was within the periphery of our camp,
Right.
watching us when we came back, and disassembled and broke down and got back into the campfire. They were out on the outskirts of our camp watching us because of what we heard on the audio. And then later, when we go down the trail and we come in close proximity to that little one laying in the grass, that means that they were moving along. They were in our periphery, and it was always the mom and two older juveniles. So the footprints told us that it was always the matriarch and the siblings. She's probably the learning process for them. The male was hardly ever around. It's almost like his role was to guard the perimeter of the area that they were in. Most of its tracks were found on the periphery of the whole perimeter that they lived in. So he was never a part of the component of us. It was the two juveniles and the matriarch. So and it's what she allowed them to do.
Mm.
And so that was kind of the relationship that I think I've got a better understanding of. So it lessens my fear, that it's less than likely to be a large male that is worried about us. Uh, you know, uh, so that allows me somewhat to be less fearful, even though the fear is still way up here.
Sure.
knowing that if I was to step out and to know that I'm hearing a noise outside the perimeter of my camp, that it's more than likely a juvenile or a female. So,
Yep. Yep. And you know, most animals don't want to engage, right? They don't want to risk potential injury to themselves. And so if they don't want you there, they're probably going to let you know by some other means. You know, yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So
It's interesting. The other spot that I'll tell you some more stories because it's fun to do that. But the other spot where I had the first stuff happen that really made me go, wow, there could be something to this, was in 2011. And again, in this case, Kathy and Bob Strain were but it's interesting that most of the times we've had something compelling happen, they're like Bigfoot magnets, those two. That's the cheeky way of putting it. But really, I think what actually is the case is here are a couple of very, very smart people with a lot of experience who've put a lot of work into where they go and figuring out, putting themselves in with the best possible opportunity for something to happen. These up in the Sierra Nevadas, that's where Kathy actually works. She's a member of the Forest Service up there. She was Forest Service archaeologist for the Stanislaus National Forest. And so she invited me in 2011 to come and join her and Bob and a bunch of other friends. We had Tom Yamarone out there, you may know, and then a couple of other good friends. There was Jerry Hine and David Osborne. And we all went up there and we stayed in a public campground about an hour from where Bob and Kathy live up in the Sierras. I should show you some pictures. If I can share screen, I can show you some of these. And you can get a sort of a look of the place. Okay, cool. So yeah, so this is the general area that we were in. Wonderfully squatchy area, you know, for lack of a better term. But the reason that we were there was one, from Kathy's living in the area and also working at the Forest Service. She'd get reports come in, you know, so she knew where the areas were. She was the she was in the BFRO for ages there and would collect reports from the area. So she had a big database of what was going on in the area. Bob had been very active in that area. He had encounters himself in that area even before they met. And you know, just in terms of like figuring out where the food resources are at certain times of year, where the water is in the middle of summer, all this kind of stuff, because we were there in I think it was July of 2011. And they'd also done some legwork. They'd been up there, they'd done a little bit of call blasting and listened to hear if there were any return calls and that sort of stuff. And basically, they'd found this one area that seemed very, very promising because it had everything that we were looking for in it. And it had a history of sightings. The campground that we were staying in had a history of sightings in particular. So we went to this particular campground, and a short distance from there, there was a this is the kind of area we're talking about. So just beautiful, beautiful forest. But there was an overlook. This is a photograph of the overlook taken one of the subsequent years that we went there, where basically there's a ridge, sort of meandering ridge line, and there was a road that bisects that goes along the ridge line just to the south of the top of the ridge. So you've got a little bit of high ground with forest on it to the north of the road, which and then to the south it would drop down into the valleys, which is what you're seeing. This is the view looking south, but there were these sort of arms, these of the hillside that stretched out, and we're on one of those here, the sort of track here, going out to the south, and that was identified as quite a good place to park a vehicle and call blast, basically. So broadcast these noises out to see if something would respond or draw something in. And they had some luck there. This is the opposite view. So this is in the same site, but turning around looking north. So the roadway is just below the picture. The road goes from left to right through there. And this is on the far side of the road. This is the uphill side with the trees. And this is the area where we had some stuff happen. That was very, very interesting. I think I've got a map of that, actually. I drew a little, yeah, okay, we'll get to this. I've got a little drawn map that I'll show later on. I don't want to get too granular about exactly where it is because I've got another friend who's actively working this area at the moment and getting results, and I don't want to mess anything up for him. But we were in this specific spot because literally where these trees are, these exact same trees, 7 years earlier, Kathy and Dave Osborne and Bob had an eye shine encounter, and I believe I may be misrepresenting it, but I think that Dave and his son, his teenage son at the time, actually did see the physical outline of the animals at the edge of the tree line as well, at this exact spot, literally under these exact same trees that I've got this photograph of. And that was the same time of year, almost to the day, 7 years earlier from when we were there. We were there, we stayed in the campground down the road from here, and every night we would, in the evening and the afternoon, we'd come up here. We'd do other activities during the day. We'd come up here in the evening and afternoon, and we'd call blast to see if we could get anything to respond. And we'd had some return calls. So we would blast out the Ohio howl, and sometimes we would get what seemed like the same thing coming back at us from a distance, which was enough to keep us going back. There was one particular night that Kathy misplaced her wedding ring up there somehow. She dropped it, and so the next day we went up there and we were searching all around the site trying to find it. Tommy Amarone, what a legend! He found the wedding ring, gave it back to Kathy, which was great. But in the process of us all searching the site, David Osborne found what appeared to be, looked pretty much like a footprint. Wasn't definitive, but it was certainly that was just to the left of this picture. This is the spot here. So basically where the road snakes through, on the uphill side of the road here, he finds what looks like a footprint. And then just below it, to the left of it, there's sort of a half of what looks like a footprint as well, which could be the other corresponding other foot. It looks like something had stepped off the trail. With its heel on the tar seal and its foot in the duff, and then it's taken a right foot step up a little bit higher, and then potentially, if there was another left foot step, it's on harder ground and there's no evidence of a footprint there. So it was one of those things where it's like, yeah, you can kind of see toes. It might be a footprint, 11.5 inches long. We weren't really completely sure, but my thought was, well, if that's a footprint there, then that means that this animal, whatever it is, be it a hiker or a Sasquatch, has crossed the road here. So there should be potentially footprints on the other side of the road. So I crossed to the other side, and behind this tree here, where I've got the arrow showing here, I found what looked like another print. There was an impression. It looked like something had come up and stood behind this tree, and then gone across the road. That's an interpretation. Could be completely wrong. It could just be where rocks have rolled out of the ground, but it certainly looked like footprints to us, and we cast them.
Well, and that would be a great strategic discovery too, in the fact that it would start out behind the protection of the tree, making sure the road, you didn't hear any vehicles coming before it made its cross.
That was what was in my head anyway. But again, I have to be conscious of the fact I'm creating that picture in my head by my attempt to interpret the evidence, and I'm reading things into it. So that may be completely not what happened. They may not have been footprints at all. They certainly looked like it, because they had, like, there were twigs and stuff that were scuffed and the bark rubbed off them where this thing had stepped. There were things that were crushed. There was what looked like toes, but again, I have to acknowledge I may have been reading that into it, but and then maybe it was just where a rock had rolled away or something. But it was interesting, because again, it was in the same spot where these guys had activity, a couple of years before, or 7 years earlier. There again, I'm just sort of showing where the possible prints were. We did cast them. You couldn't really read much from the cast, to be honest. But we decided anyway that night we would come back and do some more call blasting. So the next slide should be, okay, so here's my roughly drawn map of the site. In reality, the compass points, the relevant compass points in this location were actually southeast, northeast, northwest, all that kind of stuff. But that's a little harder to picture in your head. So I'm gonna take the whole site, and I've reoriented it 45 degrees. So I'm talking north, south, east, west, because that's easier to visualize. The road is the black line going through the screen here. The darker it gets on the picture is the lower in elevation, and the lighter it is higher in elevation. So on the north side of the road here, it was higher, and on the south side it was lower, and descending off into the valley where we were call blasting down into. The two vehicles here are where we parked our cars, and the green you can see on the sides is where you've got vegetation. That's forest. So this picture, if I go back one step, this picture here is looking left down the road into that S curve, right? That's this area back here, and that's looking north across the street to the north, and this being the view to the south. Go back here again. Okay, so that's the north looking up, and then down to the bottom of the screen is the south. There was a big fire pit down here to the south, and once it got dark, we got a fire going there. We did some core blasting basically early on in the evening. I can't remember if we got anything back that particular night, but as things started to get dark, we got a fire going, and this fire was raging. We used the big sugar pine cones, which are like the size and shape of like footballs, and we chucked some of those in there, and they're like grenades, right? When those things go. So this fire was big, safely contained. We had water nearby, all this kind of stuff. Really, I just want to stress that Bob was a firefighter, so this was all very, very legit and legal. Down to the left of the fire area is in this dark area of woods down here. Was a very, very steep and narrow little gully. And I walked around down in there, and it was not a nice feeling being down in there because everything was very close. But that gully opens up and eventually goes down into the valley below us. We'd been there. The idea was we'd done the call blasting, so if there were any animals in the area that were interested, we figured they would know we were there. The idea behind the fire was make a nice big fire, and now we're going to just act like happy campers. And we sang songs, and Bob was doing some interpretive dance, and Tom Yamron was there on his guitar. Dave Osborne took a turn on the guitar as well. I was singing. We were dancing. We were just having a good time. But the whole time we're listening and watching. And Kathy and I, in particular, stationed ourselves sort of. I tried as much as possible to be facing away from the fire so that my night vision, my natural eyesight, night vision was preserved. So I was watching and listening. And where there's the number 1 on this on this graphic here was around I must have been around 8:30 or 9 o'clock. We started hearing movement down here where the number 1 is. Which was also what happened 7 years earlier in the same spot. They heard movement and something seemed to be moving through that area. So Kathy and I both sort of, we looked at each other and marked it. That's interesting. Again, it could be nothing, could be mundane, could be deer, whatever. And shortly thereafter, we hear more movement there where the number 2 is. The footprints are where we had found the footprints earlier in the day on the graphic. And then the number 3 above there on the roadside is where shortly after we'd heard the movement at number 1, and then a few minutes later at number 2, at number 3, we hear kapow, wood knock, like clear as day. You're like, wow, now that's something. Now we're on high alert. Like this is probably what makes a wood knock like that, So okay, this is interesting. We continued doing our thing, honestly, I have to thank Tom Yomer, and dude put in work that night. He was on that guitar and singing and working it so hard. I mean, he must have been exhausted, but he was a legend. He was amazing. And while he's doing that, I'm looking north from where I hear the wood knock, and I see where the number 4 is. I see a set of eyes looking at us from through the and it's now fully dark. It must be about 10 o'clock at night by now. The forest is completely black. The only light really you can see is from the sky above. And obviously we've got our big campfire going. I later looked online to see how long the distance was, and it was 400 feet from our campfire to where I think the eyes were to the north of the road, which sounds like a lot. But you've got to remember that I'd been sitting away from the fire, so my eyes were night adjusted. I'm looking out into the dark, and any small little amount of light feels really much brighter than it really is because your eyes are fully dilated and you've got all that rhodopsin doing its work. So I was seeing these red eyes up there that seemed to me to be reflecting our firelight. Again, there are other animals that do that. Any animal with a reflective eye is going to do that. Coyotes, bears, owls, even deer. We saw deer the night before and had observed them. The big difference between this and what I observed in the deer was when you could see the deer would turn its head and its eyes were on the side of its head, and one would disappear you know, and then the other one, you could really tell that you were looking at a herbivorous animal with eyes on the side. Whereas this animal that I was seeing had eyes on the front of its face, because when it would turn its head, you could see it was on a flat face. I couldn't see the face itself, but I could still see both eyes most of the time when it was turning its head and looking around. And very quickly thereafter, 3 more pairs of eyes appear on that hillside. And I don't know if you can see on this graphic, but I've drawn little dots, sort of
Yep.
roughly where they were. And Kathy sees them too. Now, okay, I'll come back to what I was about to say. So we see these eyes, and there's a set on the left, and it's down low. And when I was back in the daylight the next day, I think this animal was down in some manzanita scrub, and it was watching from in this manzanita scrub. It stayed relatively in the same place for the first hour or so that we were there.
Can we go back to the picture that you show that
Yeah.
side of the road?
Yeah. There we go there. And in fact, I took one of these photographs and I artificially just in Photoshop darkened it to show what it was looking like at night. Here's me standing in the same spot with the trees behind me, and you can see all the manzanita scrub in the front, and then it's thick pines behind, and then you can see the sky behind that. I don't know if you can see me there. I'm right there in the middle of the frame
Yeah.
to scale. So this is that same photograph darkened. I don't know how well you can see that on your screen, but this is not an actual photograph of the scene. This is just artificially darkened, and I've gone and painted in the eyes. I don't know if you can see them in there, but
Yep.
that's kind of what I was seeing when I was looking back up there. So there was 2 in the middle, 1 to the left, and then another pair to the right. And what was interesting was the ones in the middle were doing this, like rocking backwards and forwards in this really, really interesting way. And they would disappear behind the trunk of the pine tree and pop out one side, and then they'd pop out the other. And they'd swap positions. There were 2 of them. One was lower than the other, and then they'd swap and move around a little bit. So it's, again, interpretation, 2 animals behind a tree, taking turns to sort of peek out. And they're doing this kind of nervous shuffle backwards and forwards, you know, which again is quite an apey thing to do. And I just want to do a quick sidebar here. I use the term ape. I don't know what these animals are. Once they're discovered, we can classify them, and maybe they're much closer to human. Maybe they're literally in the human genus. I don't know. Or maybe we find they're closer to modern apes or to prehistoric apes. I don't know. But I do know that they're not bears. They're not anything else like that. They're in the ape family. So I use that term very, very broadly. I don't mean to strip them of any personhood by using that term. I know some folks get quite sensitive about that. They're like, no, they're forest people. They could well be, and I don't want to suggest that I'm insulting them in any way. I have great respect for apes, so I use the term ape generally. Anyway, apish kind of behavior is what we're seeing here. We all had a bit of a huddle. What are we going to do? I had suggested, well, what if we took turns going up, trying to get closer to see if we could get a better look at them? We didn't have any thermal equipment with us. Subsequent years we did, and the interesting thing with that was what we found was that once you pointed the thermal imagery at this patch of forest, anything that's behind a tree or behind pine needles, you can't see anyway. So I don't actually know how useful it would have been that time. We did have 3rd generation night vision equipment, and we used that. Now, whenever I looked through it, all I could see was just like a wall of pine needles and manzanita scrub. One of the other guys with us, Jerry Hines, said that when he looked, he thought he saw a figure standing up there on that hillside. I didn't see that, so I can't confirm that. But what I would see is if I drop the night vision away and let my eyes adjust, I could see pupils looking back at me, and they would blink and they would look at each other like they were animated. It was eye shine. But you couldn't really see anything through the night vision because of the foliage. So we decided we would take turns going up there and seeing how close we'd get. So I walked up there to within maybe, I don't know, 25 yards of the edge of the forest, and I sort of sat there and I talked to them and that kind of thing. And I could see them moving around. I could hear them moving. You could hear their footfalls when they would shift position. So I could tell these were animals that were on the ground, right? They weren't owls. But I could never see a silhouette because it's just too dark in there. So
were you facing them, or was your back to them?
Sometimes I was facing them. Sometimes I sat side on and let my peripheral vision do the work. I did notice that if I moved too far to the left or too far to the right, and I no longer had our campfire directly behind me, I couldn't see anything. And I think that's because in order to view that eye shine, you have to be, between the fire and the reflecting of the eyes, right? So they were not self-illuminated. I think for myself, I could put that to bed and say that's not a thing. But I can understand why people might think that, because when I was standing there in the dark looking at them, they looked like they were as bright as somebody toking on a cigarette in the dark, right? That's how bright they were, really bright. Kathy took a turn going up there by herself and sitting up there while I went back to the fire. And when she was up there, again, I didn't observe this, but she says that they whistled to each other in two-tone whistles, like, and then one would reply, which immediately in my mind, I'm thinking of the Sierra sounds, because that's exactly what you hear in that. And interestingly enough, as the crow flies, we're a matter of miles from where the Sierra sounds were recorded. Like, it's not far away from where we are here. What was I saying? Oh yeah. So anyway, she goes up there. She hears the whistles. She replies to them, and they whistle back. And she has a whistle exchange with these animals. Man, okay, like wood knocks, footfalls, eye shine, whistles. These aren't coyotes we're dealing with. These aren't deer, right? Like this is the target species. If this animal is real, we are interacting with them at this moment. That's where my head was at the time. Kathy takes some time up there, and then she comes back to camp. And of course, the first thing she says is, "Did any of you guys whistle?" And we're like, "No, no, no, we didn't do that, and we didn't hear that." So that was pretty cool. The other guys took turns going up there. Bob went up and stood there. Bob said that he saw flashes of red, but he never got the sustained eye shine that Kathy and I saw up there. Tom Yamarone, I talked to him later. As I understand it, I don't think if he might have seen nothing at all. He might have seen some red flashes, but I'm not even sure if he saw that the whole time. And this was for Kathy and I, this was 2 or 3 hours of sustained stuff that we saw up there. But Dave, he didn't. I don't think he saw anything that time either, which drives me kind of crazy, because for us, this was a profound experience, a sustained profound experience. For those guys, they were not seeing what we were seeing. I have a couple of ideas about why that might be. One, when those guys went up and had a look, I think they were too far to the right-hand side and out of the line of the fire, so they may not have been able to see the reflection of the eyes of the firelight. Two, all of those guys wear glasses, and all of them had been around the fire. So I'm wondering whether the polarization on their glasses made it really difficult to discern the dim eye shine in the darkness, perhaps. I don't know. But those guys did not have the same experience that Kathy and I had. But I know that Kathy and I were not imagining things, because we would see things and react to them at the exact same time. Like when Bob went up there, one of these animals moved to get a better look at him. Like you saw it get up and you saw it go bop, bop, bop and walk along. Like you see the eyes traveling to get closer to where he was and then reposition itself in the manzanita again. And both of us were like, whoa, we both saw that happen at the same time. So all this was going on. A weird thing happened in there that I now really, really regret, which is early on I had suggested, well, why don't we just take our turn going up there one at a time, nothing too threatening. We don't want these animals to run off. We go up there, we stick around for a while. If they don't move away, then we come back. We take the pressure off, right? In the hopes that we can have a peaceful interaction and maybe just prolong it in the chance of seeing something, of seeing more than just eyes, maybe a silhouette, or seeing one on night vision. At one point, Dave and Tom and Jerry and Bob were all up there together. There's 4 of them up there. And when they came back to camp, Kathy and I sort of said, hey guys, maybe it's not a good idea to do that, because like 4 guys all walking up there together, that's kind of threatening. I think in the heat of the situation, I think that got misinterpreted, because when I later talked to Dave about it, he thought we were telling them they couldn't go up and have a look. And I feel terrible about that now, because I feel like they felt like they were denied the encounter, because those guys didn't go up there again. They didn't try again. So at that point on, it was just me and Kathy up there going up and taking turns. And I feel really bad, because I feel like I want them to have had the same experience we did, and they didn't, because of a miscommunication, I think. Anyway, this was going on. Same sort of thing. We'd go up, try and get close. We'd see eyes, but we could never get more than that. It's getting close to midnight. I think it was just after midnight, actually. And we're at a bit of an impasse. What are we going to do, guys? What are we going to do to change the situation here and try and get more out of it? Kathy and Bob were like, well, you go home on a plane tomorrow to New Zealand. What are you going to wish your whole life that you had done? And I thought, I'm going to wish that I had just picked a pair of eyes and just walked straight up to it to say hello and see how close I can get. And so Kathy's like, well, that's what you got to do then, right? I'm like, okay, I'm going to do it. So Tom Yammerin had brought some apples with him, and we'd been leaving them out in different places as like offerings and stuff like that to see if anything would come and take them. So I took a handful of apples. Kathy and I took some apples with us, and she and I walked up to this edge of the road here. And it was interesting. As she walked forward ahead of me, the tallest of the eyes was the one on the far right, who was just below. You can see on the right-hand side, there's a gap in the trees here.
Yeah.
Where the skyline comes down quite close to the ground there, and the trees there are probably only around maybe 10 or 12 feet tall. And the eyes, the tallest set of eyes was over there, and the whole encounter, that set of eyes never moved. They stayed completely stock still, very close to where that gap in the trees are. And at one point, I scribed a mark on the ground with my feet where I was standing, so that in the morning I could come back, put myself in the same situation, line that up, and I could go and do some measurements of how tall those eyes were off the ground. The answer to that is around 8 feet tall, possibly even as high as 9. I didn't have a measurement. I had to gauge it roughly, but that actually had me like tears in my eyes the next morning at how tall this animal was. And there's no way it was an owl sitting in a tree, because the little trees there, the little tiny branches, they wouldn't have supported an owl with these huge, great big, eyes like this. 6 inches apart or whatever they were. Probably not that, probably less than that. But that was when we walked closer and we crossed the road and actually went up to the edge of this berm here, to the edge of the wood line. That animal, his eyes like went, whoa, like you saw him react, like he was startled, and it was almost as if the eye shine, which to that point had been kind of orange red, it's almost like it got bigger and yellower for a second or something. I don't know. It was kind of weird. My interpretation of that is if they were dilated before, then they went super dilated for a moment, just like in surprise. I don't know. Maybe his eyes went wide or something, but that animal reacted in a way when we came close. Kathy stopped at the edge of the berm. I kept walking, and I walked right up into the edge of the tree line, in amongst the pine trees, and you could hear them move back. Like you could hear footfalls, and I lost sight of the eye shine around me, but I could hear them moving away from me, and I was like, oh man, I've screwed it up. I've ruined our situation here. And I suddenly felt a bit foolish, and I suddenly felt a little bit scared, which I hadn't felt to that point. It was all very peaceful. So I had this apple in my hand. I'm like, hey, sorry guys, I didn't mean to scare you all off. Here, I bought you an apple, and because I was kind of nervous, and I've never been good at sports, I did this little underarm toss with the apple, and it went up about 20 feet in the air, and it comes down about 5 feet in front of me. And then I turned, and as I turned, I looked, and I saw a pair of eyes, probably. It's hard to say in the dark, but I would say no more than 20 feet away, maybe closer than that, pop out from behind a tree like this, and then go back in again, like looked out and then hid again. And as I turned to walk away and go back out of the forest, I could see Kathy down in front of me, and she grabs her apple and she lobs it, and she like does a freaking baseball pitch, right? And it goes flying in there straight, and you can hear it like, clipping leaves as it goes in. And everything then happened all at once. And I struggled to remember exactly what order it happened in, because it was happening like bang, 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 bang. But basically there was just this rush of noise, of trees, of brush breaking, just lots of noise around us. And Kathy and I both thought that we were being rushed, like we were being bluff charged or something. So I hastened my retreat. And we heard what Kathy said to her sounded like like a deep, heavy vocalization from would have been my left then, because I was heading away. So back in the area where the tallest set of eyes was, it came from that direction. To me, it sounded like an impact, like a thump on the ground, either like a foot hitting the ground or something jumping out of a tree or a rock being dropped, but it sounded like a big, heavy impact. As I say, Kathy said to her, it sounded like a vocalization. And there was the loudest wood knock I have ever heard, which sounded really close by. Like if it was 50 feet, it was in my lap. Like it was so close by from over in that direction. And then we just heard them bug out, and they took off, and you could hear them clearing out. Kathy and I, meantime, were bugging out ourselves back to camp, a little alarmed. We flicked to white light at that point because we didn't have our lights on at that point, but we had torches with us. And why I didn't turn my torch on when I was in the forest and those eyes were right in front of me, I can't tell you. I don't know why I never thought to do it. It didn't occur to me in that moment. But as we were running away, we turned our lights on because we didn't want to trip over and land on our asses. And as we did that, we caught the gleam of what we later realized was a road stanchion, like a little reflective marker on the side of the road on a stick. But in our haste and our heightened sense, we were like, oh, we thought it was another set of eyes just for a second. Oh my God, they're coming around the side. So that we go racing down to the camp. And the other guys apparently later on said it was actually comical when we came racing down into the campfire area, and we're like, throwing dirt on the fire, like, we gotta go, we gotta get out of here, and everybody like jumps in the trucks, and we haul ass, peel out of there, spraying metal everywhere, and off down the street. And as we go down, we see the road stanchion, and I'm like, oh, that's what that was. That wasn't eyes there. That was just the damn road stanchion. But that was totally different to the eye shine we had been seeing, which had been, animated and blinking and dilating, all this kind of stuff. And we haul ass down the road back to our campsite where our tents were, which was about a mile away. And it was really weird. Everybody was sort of hyped up, and we had a quick debrief on what had just happened and agreed that we had overreacted, but that in throwing the apples in, we did something that we broke the rules. We did something that those animals did not like. And I felt like a kind of a jerk for having done it. But then we were also hyped up on adrenaline, and I guess it just wore off, and everybody just went, okay, we're going to bed. And we all just went into our tents and went to sleep.
Wow.
Cut to the next morning. I'm lying in my tent. It's 5 a.m. and I can hear people moving around outside. And I hear somebody clearly say, oh yeah, I saw Bigfoot. And I'm thinking, oh, that's Jerry, in our party. He's talking to the people in the campsite next to us, because there was like a camper there when we arrived. He must be talking to them and telling them about his experiences in the past, that kind of thing. I mess around. It took me like another couple of hours to actually get out of my tent and emerge. And we all had breakfast together and talked about the night before. But when I got out, the people who had been camped next to us were gone. And I said to Jerry, oh, did you talk to those folks this morning? I heard you telling them about your experience. And he's like, no, I didn't get up till just before you did. I'm like, oh, well, that's weird. I heard somebody say I saw Bigfoot. And he goes, yeah, well, that was the people when they were leaving. I can't remember now who had I think somebody talked to the camp host. I'm a little fuzzy on this, but I need to go back to my notes. But somebody did talk to those people before they left. And they said that, and they'd hauled us out of there at 5 a.m. and they said to somebody there, the bears here walk on two legs. We're out of here. So they freaked out, like something happened to them.
Wow.
And they left, which makes me wonder whether we maybe drew something back down to camp, perhaps. We had been hearing wood knocks in the mornings at the campsite. You'd wake up in the morning and you'd hear kapow up on the ridgeline above. And you're like, well, that's interesting. So who knows? And that exact campsite, Kathy later told me, there had been reports of people, some guy walking over to the latrines and coming face to face with, 7-foot big brown animal, standing there looking back at him and stuff like that. So that was pretty cool. That was the end of that week, that wild week, and that crazy night. We went up there the next morning and we looked for more footprints, but the area up on top there, where all this was going on, was too hard packed. There's just no footprints up there. There were some old deer tracks from probably weeks earlier when maybe there'd been some rain or something, but you really couldn't see anything. Our apples were gone, for whatever that's worth, which is nothing really, because anything could have taken them. But it was pretty cool. We went back to that spot 2 more times in the following years, and some other people in attendance. This is just scenery from nearby to show the kind of country we were in. Where we were wasn't quite as rugged as this, but this is a few miles away. But in the subsequent years, we had the second year we went there, we had no visuals, but we had insane vocalizations return to our calls. We'd blast the Ohio howl and it would come straight back and close. And you would hear, so we'd do the oh of the howl, and then seconds later, back again. And there was a couple of times when it would do weird things, like it would trail off and then a second one would start. So there seemed to be 2 animals responding to us. or something that I've only ever heard somebody else talk about once, which was an Ohio howl response to our blast, and mixed in with the howl, like hearing, oh yeah, bang, 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 like something whacking the crap out of a tree, which was to me was a pretty clear go away. Like it's hard to misinterpret that. And unfortunately also, and then there was one also time that we got a return call, and at the end of the call, it sort of changed from oh into kind of like
Nice.
growly, kind of weird stuff. And I'm like, whoa, this is cool. Unfortunately, that particular trip, we had to call a quits to our call blasting because we actually discovered that there was some people camped down in the valley below us. And after we'd had some return vocals, we started hearing their voices, and they were freaking out. And through the night vision, we started to see a glow of a fire that we couldn't see with our naked eye. It must have been too deep in the trees, but they were camped, not in an official campsite. They must have just pulled off a trail somewhere down there, and we must have ruined their camping trip.
Oh, they stoked up a fire, didn't they?
Yeah, they sure did. And there was a woman's voice, very animated, and there was a guy like trying to calm her down. It was hilarious. I mean, in retrospect, it was hilarious, but I also feel kind of bad because we kind of ruined their night. We went down there the next day to see if they were still there, and they'd gone. But
Wow.
they must have used every piece of firewood they had. But we then tried the following night. We did one more lot of call blasting. We had no responses, but we two of us, Brian Brown and I, went and sat down there at that campsite and listened to the call blasting going on, and it was crystal clear. Like it didn't sound like it was coming from a speaker. It was terrifying. Like if you had been down in that valley and you heard that, and then you heard something behind you respond, oh my God, I feel really
Wow.
bad for those people.
Man, I can imagine. Well, a few years ago, I was out there. I spent a week or so in the high Sierras outside of LaPorte, California.
Oh yeah.
So I think that was about 30 miles away from that area. So, but it's all really fantastic area.
Oh, it's gorgeous country. We were in the sort of rough area, I'll tell you, where we were near a couple of small towns named Strawberry and Bumblebee. And those, which they're such unusual names, I always remember them. But outside one of them, there's like a little general store and a Sasquatch statue, and those places just ate up with sightings. Like Kathy was relating to me every time we'd go out on day trips, exploring and so on. I'm doing my Bigfoot tourist thing. She was like, "Oh yeah, there was a report of a road crossing right here," or here's one where one was in a gravel pit screaming at people, and here's where this and stuff. So there was just the place is full of it in the lore.
Wow.
Oh, and there's other stuff like this was I don't know if you can see that, but there's a really nice big mountain lion print right there next to that dollar bill for
Wow.
scale. That was the second year that we were there, and I went out for a little night hike, and then came back, and then the next morning I did the same trip, and I could see my footprints, and I could see this mountain lion crossing my footprints. So that was a
Mm-mm-mm.
reminder of where we were. Pretty cool stuff. Yeah, again, we went back in 2013 to the same spot. This is in the valley below where we were getting the return calls from. And I took my wife actually and a friend of mine from work came with me on this trip. And we had a spectacular trip. We didn't have a whole lot happen in terms of potential activity that on that 2013 year, other than on the last night in the exact same spot on that overlook, doing the exact same thing, call blasting. We had another eye shine incident, very much like the first year, not as intense, but the difference this time was because of the fire restrictions, it was very dry that summer. We could not have a fire out there. So we just had a little camp lantern with a white light. And that was interesting to me because when we did see eye shine that night behind literally the exact same trees as the first year, the eye shine was white, not red. So
Mm.
maybe it was a different type of animal, or maybe it's the fact that the eyes were reflecting the color of the light that we had going,
Right.
and they're very very dim, which I also point to the fact that our little camp lantern was putting out much fewer looms than say huge great big bonfire that we had raging. And in
Yeah.
this year, where there were only two sets of eyes, they stayed behind the central pine trees, and they would just peek out, and then they go back in, just peek out and go back in. They're real tentative. And this year we did have thermal equipment, and I tried to get a look at those. Man, I went round in circles. I went round behind them. I went round all the sides. I worked it really hard trying to get a look at them with the thermal. I could never get anything. Whatever it was stayed hidden and probably moved to get away from me. I would lose sight of them and I'd see them again. Um, It was very cold because we couldn't have a fire, and so in the end, we kind of decided to give up on it because we just couldn't get anything to happen up there. We
Well,
couldn't get a look at what these animals were, and we
if
wandered back to camp. But this time, we walked back to camp in the hopes that something would follow us. My wife and I walked down the street with Martha Osborne, Dave's partner, who was there with us that year as his wife, and we sang songs and chatted and stuff, and walked down the road back to our camp a mile away. And it was quite cool because what we would do is we'd count the steps and then we'd stop and see if we could catch something. And one time we did that, there was a like a crack up on the hillside above us, like something maybe took an extra step. And
mm, and
I remember my wife.
what did your wife and friend think?
So Catherine's like at that moment, she's like, I really want to be back at the campsite now. I'm not happy about this. So, no, she was amazing. She was super cool. She was super brave.
Oh,
And there was nothing, to be honest, there was nothing threatening about that situation other than what we brought to it in our heads, right?
right,
I
right.
can't say that those were Sasquatch, but it was similar enough to the first year's activity that it makes me think maybe on its own, if that had all that happened, maybe not. But the fact that it was so similar to what happened the first year, that first year, again, I don't know for a fact that Sasquatch are real. I know you do. I haven't had that experience, so I don't know. But if they are, then I feel like we encountered them that night. We encountered four of them.
Well, it sure
Um,
sounds like it. It sure sounds
it's
like that's what happened. If I was
I
to,
have no idea what else it could be.
and that was in 2011, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I throughout that whole story, I think to myself, what would I do with the equipment that I have? If I was to go to that spot with, let's just say me, you, Kathy, and Bob, and Tom Yamarone went back to that spot, uh, I would take all my equipment, and before the night began, I would go down into that ravine, and then I
Yeah.
would go up across the road, and I would put one of my log recorders further back into
Yep.
the wood lines and let it record throughout the whole night. That way, if anything did happen, we would record what was happening up there around those logs.
So I
And
did record. So I did record. I had audio recorders set out, and I did get some of the stuff on recording. Unfortunately, the recordings are low enough quality that it's really difficult to hear it. I need to actually, I've been meaning to, gosh, it's been like 15 years, but I've been meaning to get one of my friends who works in sound for the movies, try and do some work on them and try and pull out the audio because there are yells in that, like you can hear some of the return vocals very low in the distance on that audio. I didn't have
nice.
my levels set correctly on my audio recorder. It's the usual thing. It's the friggin' Bigfoot curse. I'm fumbling in the dark trying to set my thing and I screw it up, I'm an idiot.
Well,
But we've got some. But yeah, it would be incredible to get up there with better equipment. I mean, to have that thermal drone that you've got going, that kind of stuff. So the reason we haven't been back since then is within a couple of months of us being up there, this whole area was devastated by the California rim fire.
I
And so
remember
this
that.
photograph that I've got up on screen now, that place that's gone. All that stuff is gone. It was toasted. I think the site that we were at did survive. I think the fire didn't get quite up to that area, but basically you couldn't go there. Like you were not allowed for years to go in there while the forest was regenerating. It is, as far as I'm aware, you can go up and then and camp there again now. And as I say, I've got a friend who's actively working this site, who can. That's actually, sorry, I've just jumped too far on my slides. That's the Washita. So that's Area X.
Yep.
But yeah, so I don't know, man. It was exciting between that stuff in the Sierras that happened, and then the rock throws and stuff down in Area X, which sometimes seemed to be in direct response to things we were doing. Like there was a time I was out there with Daryl, and we were a short distance away from camp, Daryl Collier, and he made a call. Oh no, I made a call, which was terrible. And then he did a big he did his version of the Ohio howl or something like that. I can't remember what it was he did. Maybe it was an angry chimp noise that he did. And immediately he did that, kapow! A rock comes flying in and hits this. There was like an old derelict fifth wheel trailer nearby with a metal siding on it. And you just hear that rock hit it. And we ran over there to have a look. We didn't see anything. But the interesting thing was the whole backside of that derelict fifth wheel is covered in impact marks from rocks. Like that thing is a drum for whatever's throwing rocks in there over the years.
Wow. Hey,
Um,
can you click the stop share button?
yeah, yeah. Sorry about that.
Hey, yeah. I mean, one thing that I've gotten to the point where I think I've learned is I have my drone set up and just covered with a blanket ready to go. It's got to be ready to go. It's you
Off it
can't take the
goes.
time to get it all set up. It needs to be set up and already ready to go. And I also bought some headless wireless headsets with a little mic where if I send the drone up and we can see a heat signature, then we'd send Kathy and we'd tell her we both have the headsets on. I'd tell her exactly where to go to flush it.
I mean, it's a lovely picture you paint. As I say, I've kind of lost touch a little bit. I haven't kept in contact with them, which I'm feeling really bad about. I'm probably going to reach out and send an email as soon as we're done here because I feel bad about that. But because they've been nothing but absolutely lovely people to me. It's just, with the whole COVID thing and stuff like that, not being able to travel a lot, I've fallen out of contact with a lot of people. I also left the NAWAC and we sort of, as I say, we started up our own group with Brian Brown and Brandon Lentz and a few other guys. So I've kind of been doing different things, but I would love to get back up there someday. I'd love to reestablish contact with them. I'd love to go out with you again, be it there or somewhere else, or do something. It would be super, super fun. The challenge for me at the moment is I don't get to travel quite as much with work as I used to. So it's a little hard. It's expensive for me to get across to the States nowadays.
I hear you. But it's been 15 years since you and I were out, and I can't imagine that either one of us will be around 15 years from now. So that means we're going to have to be the ones to make the effort to make. I'd like it to happen one more time.
I would love that.
Before I get too old, I'd
I would
love
love
to
that.
set something up in the future, and I'd like to meet Kathy and Bob Strain in
They're lovely
a
people. You'd love them.
research. Yeah. So let's see if we can't make that happen over the next couple of years.
That'd be amazing. That'd be really cool. My situation is whenever I go across, I'm somebody's guest. So I'm not usually in control of the situation. I'm usually invited to go with people on something, but it'd be really cool to try and set something up. I agree. So I would love to.
All right. Well, man, Daniel, I can't thank you enough. I appreciate your friendship, buddy. I know, hey, what can you do? You live a couple miles away from me, so we can't get together that often. But
Yeah, like there's this little thing called the Pacific Ocean that gets in the way.
right.
I tell you, it messes up my Sasquatching, but it probably keeps I think my wife is quite happy that the Pacific Ocean exists because otherwise she'd see a lot less of me on the weekends. I'd be out all the time. We
Well,
don't have we don't have
I want to encourage any of the people watching this. Punch Daniel Falconer's name and WETA Workshop into your search engine on your laptop, and you are going to go into all kinds of information about this gentleman. And make
thank
sure
you.
make sure you purchase some of his books because
Thank you.
they are incredible.
That's nice of you to say. I've been really lucky in life. I've stood on the shoulders of giants, and I've been part of amazing teams. So I've had some pretty awesome experiences. I've been very lucky to be involved with some amazing projects. But as I say, I'm just small little cog in that wheel. The books I've written are about the work that the team has produced, and it's just a real pleasure to be able to share them. So if you're interested
Well,
in fantasy movies, that kind of stuff, the books I've written are sort of behind the scenes art books about that kind of thing. You can look them up. But yeah, thanks,
well,
Randy. I appreciate
you're
that.
you're 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 generous, when you talk about other people, and you're humble, and you're a super nice guy, and that's why I like you. So just keep doing that, buddy.
Well, thank you. You're very kind. I'll come back.
All right. Yeah, yeah, no, yeah, we're gonna have an experience that we're gonna come back and talk about.
I still need my daylight experience, man. You gotta hook me up. I want to see the monkey.
Yep, yep, yep. All right, buddy. Well, I'm going to go ahead and let you go on that. It's been a couple of hours, and it's been a great 2 hours. I thank you so
Be fun.
much.
Thank you. I always enjoy it. I don't know why we waited this long to do this.
All right. Bye-bye, buddy.
See you soon.
For the heat